ought to be in pictures. You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive Movie Reviews with my friend Steve Hackman and myself, James Marsh. This week, as part of our Asian Classics series, we are talking Akira Kurosawa's Ikiru.
Hey, but you know the drill. Before we get going, if you haven't already subscribed to Deep Dive Movie Reviews, it'd be a great favor to us if you went ahead and subscribed. And while you're there, why don't you just go ahead and like the video? And that way it helps the analytics. It gets the deep dive, this video, out to a wider audience. And just as a reminder, Deep Dive Movie Reviews does contain spoilers. But James, this is a 1952 movie. I don't think we have to worry too much about spoilers today.
No, quite possibly not. I mean, hopefully the people who are coming on watching this video will have seen the film and will be wanting to get involved in the discussion. Let us know what you thought of it. But you never know. You never know. People might be coming to it fresh. And so, yes.
As I was. This was my first my first venture into Ikiru.
Excellent. Okay, so just to set it up, I mean, I think the main reason why we chose to do this film is because there is a remake out and about now starring Bill Nighy, and he's been getting some award buzz for it. So we thought, well, why not? Because we recently did Seven Samurai, and in my mind, at least, Ikiru is one of, if not Akira Kurosawa's best contemporary set film. So I thought, what better way to introduce Steve to the wealth and diversity of Kurosawa's filmography than by doing two great films, both starring Takashi Shimura, and were made within a couple of years of each other. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the most amazing things about the film is that, if anything, it sort of showcases the diversity of that actor, because I think they actually filmed both of these films the same year. And obviously, as we saw in Seven Samurai, he is this great, strong, stoic leader of the Seven Samurai. Whereas here, he could not be more different. He's very meek, small, frail guy with,
pathetic. Really, he's pathetic. You know, he is pathetic at certain points in this film.
Yeah, that's not a harsh criticism, really. It's so different, and he does, in my opinion, both roles so compellingly, so convincingly, that you just have to sort of stand back in awe sometimes and go, okay, this guy is really on the top of his game.
I'm glad you brought that up, James, because that thought was going through my head that a traditional leading man will be, you know, Tom Cruise is never going to play this meek, mild bureaucrat. He's Tom Cruise. He will always be Tom Cruise. There might be creative roles that he takes that allows him to stretch in certain directions, but there are certain lines that won't be crossed. And with Takashi Shimura, that was what was going through my head. I'm thinking, is this the same guy who I swore I would follow if I was a samurai in Japan in the 1500s? I mean, this guy just oozed charisma in Seven Samurai. You wanted to follow wherever this guy went. And in this film, in Ikiru, the role could not be more opposite that character.
Yeah, he's like the ultimate follower in this movie. You know, he is the sort of the meek, the mild, the unassuming office drone who has just been in the same, you get the impression he's been in the same seat for like 30 years or so. I mean, just to set up the story very, very briefly, Shimura plays Watanabe, who is a sort of a career civil servant. He's been working, I think it's the Public Works Department or something like that.
Yes, indeed.
For about 30 years. And he's now kind of he's not quite department head, but he's kind of some office manager of that department.
Like section chief, I think they called it, or something.
Yeah, something like that. And you know, he's been working in the same thing year in, year out, essentially rubber stamping stuff or passing it off to other departments. And then he's hit by a bombshell when he discovers that he has got stomach cancer and he only has 6 months to live. And it really kind of rocks his world, and it makes him reappraise, you know, his job, what he's doing, his commitments, his relationship to his family, and he comes very quickly to the realization that he has done nothing with his life, and that he has nothing to leave and no legacy to leave behind, and so he sets about changing that with the remaining weeks and months that he has left. And beyond that, it's an incredible, vivid portrait of post-war Tokyo. Kurosawa really does get down into the streets with the people who are sort of struggling to sort of rebuild, to reassess what it means to be Japanese and what society is like, and the structures of society, and how all of that is being changed and being challenged, not least by Watanabe's decisions that he makes.
What I thought was interesting was this movie's made in 1952, and I thought they're really addressing issues of monotony and bureaucracy. And for me, those are the types of films that have come out more recently as a response to the boomer generation of a certain type of way of living, of doing the 9 to 5, the drudgery. Like you do your 30 years and then you retire and you look back and you think, well, why did I do this? And that's kind of a trope and a theme that you see played out more in modernity today. And I just find it interesting that Kurosawa was identifying this issue in 1952, when I thought it was more of a time where they'd be celebrating this work ethic that we're building and we're going in a certain direction. He kind of turns the tables, and he's really addressing issues of what does it mean if you are selling your soul to whether it's a company or a government department, at the end of your life, what was the return on your investment? What do you receive? And as in case of Watanabe, when he starts to do an audit of his life, it's incredibly depressing.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it as a kind of, it's a thinly veiled allegory for Japan during the war, of course, where they were sort of blindly following this sort of regimented, hierarchical sort of structure, and that everybody had their place within it, and you didn't ask questions, you just got on with it, kept your head down, and you were literally putting your life on the line for the country, and for the emperor at the top of that pyramid. And what Ikiru does is it says, well, now is the opportunity, now is the moment where we really have to take a step back and reassess that mentality, that way of living, that way of a society, and think, is that the best way? Or are there ways that I, as an individual, can benefit, can directly benefit society, that I can actually do something myself? And we don't need to blindly follow orders over the edge of the cliff into the abyss, and that actually there are more important things than merely showing up to work every day. You overhear conversations with his colleagues about how, when he misses that first day of work, and they're like, oh, it's such a shame that he missed it. He was about to hit the record of, never having a sick day in 30 years. And as if that was a legitimate achievement. There's the joke that the young woman makes in the office at the beginning, where she sort of laughs to herself, and they're like, how dare you? What is it? Yeah, and right. It's essentially a joke like, well, I couldn't take a day off work because if I did, they would realize that they didn't need me in that position, or something. And then obviously right at the end, because the film is structured quite strangely, we're about 2/3 of the way in. Spoilers: Watanabe dies, and then the final act of the story is kind of told in flashbacks from his funeral. And when his superiors and the head of the civil service almost is there. So is it the mayor, I think, even? And he's taking credit. Yes. He's taking credit for the children's park, which has been renovated and rebuilt, and that was Watanabe's project. And there's this discussion about who should get credit for it, whether Watanabe deserves the credit, which I think we're supposed to believe, yes, he does. Right. But still, there are these structures in place, these hierarchies in place, where the man at the top of the tree, as it were, well, it's all, he should get all the praise, because even though he probably was blissfully unaware that the project was even going ahead.
And I don't know how you feel, James, but having lived in Asia for 30 years, not that any culture is immune to that kind of butt kissing, but there is an element out here of that hierarchical structure and the platitudes, and then sometimes the logic which is used to explain it. Because at some point they say, well, Watanabe could not have built that park, because without the Parks Department, it wouldn't have got built. So it couldn't have been Watanabe. And everybody who's watching this film is just strained at that logic. And yet it makes perfect sense to these folk. And it's something that I've witnessed many times when an excuse is given for something that strains logic and all common sense, and yet the group think, in order for it to maintain its illusion, we all have to buy into it. It's the emperor's new clothes. If anybody challenges that the emperor doesn't have the clothes, the whole system falls down. And so what's great is in that final act, Kurosawa essentially sets up the system. They're all saying, no way could Watanabe do this. No, you know, they're which is funny because they're poo-pooing him at his own wake. So that's a little strange to begin with. They're dismissing, you know, the son's there. They're kind of dismissing what Watanabe did. But then as Kurosawa begins to unravel, one person speaks up, and then another person speaks up, and then one person challenges. And it's like you said, it's that narrative that in post-war that there's a system that was in place. Call it hierarchical, call it patriarchal, whatever. But I really feel Kurosawa is trying to show, if we can get one person to speak up, it will give someone else the strength to speak up. And if this person speaks up, we can get even more of the truth to be unveiled. And that's what was beautiful to watch in that third act, is watching the lie be presented and then slowly truth whittling away at it until the lie collapsed. And watching that was beautiful filmmaking, beautiful storytelling.
Yeah, and it's sort of accentuated by the fact that since almost the opening scene, we have seen that nobody wanted to take responsibility for this project whatsoever. You know, you get an almost kind of you know, it's kind of Orwellian, but it's almost more absurd than that. It reminded me of something like Terry Gilliam's Brazil, almost, you know, which is this kind of Python-esque Orwellian sci-fi future, but it's all about bureaucracy and it's all about the different departments, where the women of that neighborhood come to complain that there's a burst sewage pipe that's now flooded the children's playground, and no one's going to do anything about it, and it's stagnating and it's turned into a bog and there are mosquitoes. And with each new piece of information, it's just made increasingly easy for these bureaucrats just to pass it off to other departments. They come to public works and they're like, a burst sewage pipe, oh, you need to go to sanitation. Oh, there are mosquitoes, oh, you need to go to like sort of environmental health. Oh, it's a flooded playground, you need to go to the schools department, you know. And they're just like ping-ponging it all around. But then as soon as he breaks out of that cycle, gets it done, then they are all falling over each other to take credit for it.
Right. And I love the imagery that in this patriarchal system, it is largely the men who are kind of inept, slow to move, are just kind of in this inertia. And what's driving everything is this group of women. Even within the department that Watanabe's in, all the guys are silent, and the one spark of life is the woman who quits. And obviously Watanabe has a few evenings with her, which rejuvenates his love for life too. So there's a real male-female dynamic at play here. That's, you know, we're seeing it as very, that kind of expression would be very normative in a film today, but in 1952 in a Japanese film was probably very unusual.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, a very sort of new dynamic, because I think during the war, a lot of the women were working in the factories. And so it's interesting that she quits that job to go back and work in a factory, albeit one now making toys instead of making sort of bombshells or something like that. But I think it was a relatively sort of new concept, having women sort of in the corporate workplace like that. And yes, I think Akira Kurosawa's suggestion is that they bring a little life and they bring positive energy to that situation. But then, yes, all these stuffy old bureaucrats ultimately kind of sort of, I think the impression is that she's not getting any. She's not getting up. She's not getting any opportunities. She's not getting any promotions, and so she leaves and ends up getting sort of a steady job back doing the kind of thing that that women were doing before. Because I think, I mean, obviously, this is a movie about sort of hope in a way. You know, it's about, you know, if only we can do this, then look what we can achieve. But I think there is a sort of an overwhelming sort of cloud of pessimism to it, which is, as what you were alluding to a moment ago, was the fact that we've both lived in Asia for a long time, and we still recognize these bureaucratic tropes and these office dynamics and sensibilities. So I think the suggestion is, or the reality is, that actually things haven't really changed all that much, and the office culture is still really far too similar 60 odd years later than it was back then.
Oh, very, very much so. I mean, I was going to even follow up with that. The fact that even though the social commentary is being made in the 50s, it did nothing to change anything. If we look at the way Japan went in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, when I arrived here in Hong Kong, I think only now is there a generation in Japan that's seriously questioning the model that they've been handed all these decades.
One of the sequences that I enjoy the most in this film is when Watanabe kind of goes out and hits the streets. He has that kind of one wild night with that with the novelist, the struggling novelist, when he's like, I've got all this money, help me spend it. And so he's like, okay, he's like, dinner's on me, but okay. And so he takes him to all these sort of different clubs and bars and restaurants and all the rest of it. And you get the feeling that there is a real sort of that almost that sort of Japan is going to be okay, that it's a little kind of chaotic and what have you, but that there is a real sort of vibrancy of life out there, and it's such a contrast between sort of the office life that he has been living, where nobody is moving, nobody is talking, nobody's doing it, and it's like, don't you know that just outside, just around the corner, that there's a whole community, a whole society that are trying to move forward and live life and have fun and enjoy themselves, even though it's all a bit kind of dilapidated, and it's all kind of a bit squalid in some areas. And it was interesting seeing the different locations that they go to. There's these sort of alleyways where there's chicken wire everywhere and all the rest of it. But then there are these sort of big, the restaurants where he goes with the young woman, and they're singing happy birthday to the other group, and you just get this idea that there is hope, and that the next generation is going to be okay. Sure. And I thought that those are the sequences for me that are kind of that work so well, because it's such a sort of vivid portrait of a whole society in a state of flux.
Yeah. I like the use of, there was a point where he's out with the young girl, and obviously that night that you're talking about, he has a good time, but he realizes this is not where I'm going to find that real life that I'm looking for. And so obviously he meets the young girl that's quit his department, and they go out for some fun time together. And and he's bought this kind of wild hat, and everybody's commenting on the hat. And I think at one point, is it she that takes it? Somebody takes it from him, and he grabs it back and he holds it tight. And I just love that metaphor. It's like his desire for life, he has sunk into the hat. The hat is the metaphor for his life, and no one is going to take his life again. Like, I've given my life, people have been taking my life, for 60, 70 years, however old he is. They never quite say. And now that I've got my life again, no one's taking it. I just love that moment that Kurosawa used the hat, I felt, to represent no one is stealing my life away from me again.
Well, I love the reaction that other people, like his son and his wife, have to the hats. They're like, what is he doing? He's on this kind of like, he has changed so dramatically. He's got a hat now.
Yeah. At work, they're commenting about it.
Yeah, they're like, he's really gone off the rails. It's so out of character for this guy. And when he takes his money out, and then he buys this hat, and then he buys stockings for this girl. I don't think it's ever confirmed, or I think it is confirmed that there isn't anything physical going on between him and the girl.
No, I really don't think there is.
Everybody assumes that. I think they say at one point that he's been a widower. He's been a widower for about 20 years, and he hasn't remarried.
20 years,
and he lives with his son and the wife, and they have a maid as well. And then suddenly he starts hanging out with this young woman, and I think it is fairly innocuous in that respect. It obviously foreshadows films like not least Lost in Translation. Where you have a partnership going around Tokyo, and they and I think they both benefit from the relationship, even though it is purely kind of, or not purely platonic, but it never gets physical. Let's say it like that.
Right. Harold and Maude.
Yes, for sure, for
Yeah,
sure. I mean,
yeah,
the age gap's
yeah.
pretty,
Yeah.
pretty huge. But I just love the way that the relationship between him and his son is portrayed. I mean, it reminds me of Ozu's Tokyo Story, which I think was 1 or 2 years after this. But that's a film all about the older generation realizing that the gulf has become too wide between the younger generation.
Right.
You know, it's about an elderly couple who go and visit. I think it is their son again who has got married in the city, and very quickly realize that they've got nothing in common and they can't keep up with this fast-paced life, and that they really should just kind of sort of step back and enjoy the rest of their time at their own pace, even if it means they have to kind of let go of their children in a way. And so there's some of the same topics going on here, where you know they're not going to be able to communicate. He's never able to explain to his son what is going on, what he's going through. You know, he doesn't even tell his son that he's sick.
No.
No, he doesn't really tell anybody. It's everybody sort of finds out, and there's a great thing during the wake where they're working out the fact that yes, he probably did know, because the assumption was that he didn't know that he was sick, and they're like, oh well, at least he found some solace in the fact that he didn't know, and so he just kind of dropped dead. But then they piece it together and they're like, oh no, he really did.
He did.
He just chose to tell nobody.
I think if there's a critique I have, and this is not so much a critique, it's just Kurosawa decided to go in this direction, and that's his choice. I would have liked to seen more of a resolution with the son. It didn't even have to be a reconciliation, but some kind of dynamic that shows that he's got ownership of his life again, and he's going to speak some truths to the wife, or to the son, and to the daughter-in-law. And that kind of relationship is just allowed to kind of just fizzle out, and it really has no bearing or ramification. Even at the wake, the son has maybe 3 or 4 lines. Once, I think, to confirm that, oh no, he must not have known he had stomach cancer, otherwise he would have told me I'm his son. But other than that, I'm trying to think where else he spoke. The son was a non-issue, and I have not seen the remake, but my guess, if there is a Western remake of this, there's going to be more reconciliation, or at least some kind of resolution to the relationship between the son and the father.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, it is part of Japanese culture that a lot of stuff is not articulated. A lot of emotion is not spoken about openly. I think the only other scene where you really see the son speak is when they're sitting at the breakfast table together, and Watanabe is saying he sort of takes a long time to psych himself up, and then he says, okay, I need to tell you something. And immediately the son goes, oh, you don't think we don't know that you've been cavorting around with this young woman and you dared to bring her into our house? And just cuts him off completely, doesn't give him a chance. And I think the sad truth is that that's what that generational divide was like, and that there is no closure, and they're haunted by the fact that there was no closure. I mean, as I've already mentioned, it's a topic that in the 50s particularly seemed to be coming up a lot in these big sort of Japanese films, was just this disconnect between them that was never fully resolved. I mean, the other thing that I really appreciate about the film is that although this is a very quiet, very sort of modestly paced, very simple story of an elderly man trying to get his life in order while he still has time, it doesn't mean that Kurosawa is taking a breather in terms of his directorial style. I mean, we've talked a little bit about how the structure is slightly different, and how the third act is told in flashback, but also just technically, I mean, there's some great camera work and just production design in this film. I mean, when we are first introduced to Watanabe, he's literally buried in this kind of sea of paperwork. There's piles of papers all around him here in the background, and it's using a kind of lens or a camera technique where he almost feels, there's no distinction, there's no depth of field between him and these piles of paperwork. So it's just like he's always been there. He's almost just like a sort of another piece of detritus, amongst all of this sort of office clutter. And I thought that was done really well. And then the other shot that really stays in my memory is when he's told that he has cancer, and you see him wander out of the hospital, and there's no sound whatsoever, and he's just walking in the street, and he's got this completely dazed look on his face, and then all of a sudden the sound snaps in as he steps into the road and almost gets hit by a bus, and the camera like pulls back across the street, and you just see the chaos of the city all around him, and the bus is zooming past, and you realize that he had just been completely sort of in his own world in that moment. And it just little bits, little flourishes like that just remind you that you're in, incredibly kind of capable hands.
Absolutely. I actually had a note about that whole Stacks Bundles, because that the aesthetic and the visual, that it just conveyed that idea of meaninglessness, because you could see these are folders and folders and folders of things that will never be opened, that work had been put into, and there'll be no need for this ever again. It conferred the idea of how inefficient and near useless this department is.
But I remember even in that opening sequence, there's a moment where he kind of opens his drawer, and there's a pile of papers there, and you just have time to read on the front cover, and it's like it's a proposal that he put in many years earlier for something, and he just tears off the top sheet and just uses it as scrap paper just to mop something up or get rid of it, and it's this brilliant suggestion really early on that he did have dreams and ambitions once, but now they're just scrap paper. And I like how it's mirrored towards the end, where there's the other member of the office team who is inspired by what Watanabe has achieved, and in like the final scenes, he's like the one guy to stand up and go, "Oh yes, and then he's immediately put back in his place and said, "You gotta sit down and get on with your work." And the camera is kind of from the other side of the desk, and as he sits down, he just disappears behind another pile of paperwork.
Because the system is always bigger than you are. It is the anti-Dead Poet Society, where they all stand up on their desks and, oh, Captain, my Captain. This is the anti-ending. This is the
filing cabinets open up and swallow them in.
That's it. That's it.
Okay, Steve. So that is Akira Kurosawa's Ikiru. Final thoughts. What did you think? How did it resonate with you?
What's great is, I got to say, is my son and his girlfriend have become regular watchers of Deep Dive movie reviews, and they have recently been doing a Kurosawa retrospective. My son's been getting into Kurosawa completely separate from me. It's something that he and his girlfriend have enjoyed. And although I haven't met her face to face, I'm already impressed with the young lady, because if they're sitting around on a Saturday afternoon watching Kurosawa, and so he's messaging me now and saying, "Oh, you got to watch this one. You got to watch this one." And now I can say, "Oh, I've watched Ikiru." And let me just say this is my second Kurosawa film now, obviously after Seven Samurai, and I just enjoyed this so much. It's a celebration of life, and it is a celebration of what's important in living. And it's something that I really resonate with, and I've shared many times when I have that kind of experience where I come away from a film, and although it does have that depressing ending where the guys are going to rise up and change, and it really is foreshadowing what we said has happened in Japanese culture, is that corporate culture ended up not be affected at all over the next decades, which is sad. But the film itself, it's aesthetically wonderful. The pacing is very steady. It's slow, and it's a slow burn, but you never get the feeling of, gosh, I wish this would just get going. There's always something to watch. There's always something to take in, whether you're on the streets of post-war Tokyo, or you're in the office that we mentioned, or you're even at the wake. I don't know how you felt, but I'm thinking those guys at that age, that they could get down on the ground and eat on the ground and get up and down. And all I kept thinking is that room is way too small, and I would be going, I got to get out of here and get some fresh air. But it's, again, though, just for the aesthetics and the setup and the interaction, it almost felt like the end of a Hercule Poirot and Agatha Christie, where everything is like the whole mystery is being solved one thread at a time. And that was the feeling that I got. So, and the very use of that it wasn't a linear progression through the whole movie. I was surprised when suddenly 2/3 in, like you said, the narrator comes in and says, "Our protagonist has died." And I'm thinking,
Wait,
okay, well, wait, there's still, I can still see there's quite a bit of movie left here. How are they going to unravel this? And obviously, as we discussed, Kurosawa chose a very creative way to do so. So pleasantly surprised. Not surprised is the wrong word. I enjoyed this film immensely. I know we're not grading it, but this would receive high marks from me. And I'm looking, you know what I'm looking forward to now, James? We've done 2 Kurosawa movies from the 50s. I'd like to jump some decades, and I'd like to see something he made like in maybe the 70s or 80s, when obviously filmmaking around the world was changing.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you liked it, because Kurosawa is one of my all-time favorites, and I think these 2 films that we have done already, Seven Samurai and Ikiru, represent the kind of great examples of the different kinds of movies that he can make and make so well. Whether it's a post-war social drama just talking about contemporary life, or whether it's one of these great lavish sort of samurai epics. It doesn't seem to faze him in any way. And he's always firing on all cylinders and does an incredible job. Yeah, I mean, I love this movie. It was great watching it again. I've probably seen it 3 or 4 times now, and it's heartbreaking. It's beautiful. It's technically, it reminds me a little bit of Decision to Leave, in how it's so sort of visually and technically audacious in a setting where it's not necessary to be that. But it's just got these little kind of flourishes of sort of virtuoso flourishes in there. And I think it's a beautiful story. It's a story that is about hope, even though the conclusion is not especially hopeful. You've got the one guy, who walking home on the bridge at the end, who looks down at the playground, and you see him watch the children use it and play on it, and you get the feeling that, okay, there is hope, but the hope is not with me. I'm pretty helpless way up here, just as a pawn in the machine. There's the hope down there. There's the hope for the future. It's with the next generation, and if we can lay the foundations for the next generation, then at this stage, that's pretty much all we can do. So it is it's kind of bittersweet, but there is this sense of hope, and obviously Japan did go through a bit of a boon in the 60s, and then kind of a bit again in kind of the 80s, but it is very much kind of like this. And as we've said, even today, things are not quite there yet. So yeah, no, I'm glad you really responded to it. I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's brilliant. I think it's a showcase for Takashi Shimura, and I love it. And I'm glad you did. And I'm looking forward to seeing Living, the remake, to see what they do with it, which is set in post-war Britain with Bill Nighy.
We'll have to review that one for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's James and I's thought on Akira Kurosawa's Ikiru. What are your thoughts? We really would like to get a dialogue going in a comment section below. And just a reminder, James and I are on social media, so you can follow us on Instagram and on not Twitter. Oh, it is Twitter.
Well,
yes.
But
yeah, that was a little joke. It was a little joke.
Today,
yeah. But
we're moving to Truth Social. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, we'll be on Twitter for now, but who knows how long. Until next time.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures all